the breathless heat of the summer of 1847, 13 members of the influential Bogard family collapsed and died within hours inside their Garden District mansion in New Orleans. Official ledgers, tucked away in the Louisiana State Archives, blame a sudden fever. But in the margins, hurried, uneasy scrawl lies another account. Dr. Armand Thibodeau, the attending physician, wrote in his private journal that he'd never seen suffering arrive so perfectly in step. The signs didn't fit any illness he knew. Fingernails black as coal, tongues swollen to a dark purple, and screams ricocheting through the halls until dawn. Most chilling of all, every death struck exactly 90 minutes after the family's sacred Sunday supper. Only one person in the house lived to see morning. Violet, the head cook. For 170+ years, the city has kept this night folded, away smothered by shame, fear, and deliberate silence. Tonight, we're opening that kitchen door. We're going to trace the path of a poison born of cruelty and consequence, and explain how an entire bloodline could vanish in a single evening dot before we follow Violet into the Bogard kitchen. Make sure you're subscribed. This channel exists to dig up the buried chapters of America's darkest histories. Tap subscribe, ring the bell, and tell me in the comments what state you're listening from. Our little community of mystery hunters stretches coast to coast. What happened at that table began years before a single drop reached a silver spoon. It grew from a rhythm of power and punishment that demanded payment. New Orleans, in 1847, was a city of stark opposites. Marble front mansions rose like thrones, while the wealth inside them rested on backs in chains. In the Garden District, Spanish moss-draped wrought iron balconies, like mourning veils, sugar barons, cotton kings, and shipping magnates drank French wine in parlors, lit by gaslight. The Bogard mansion was one of the brightest crowns among them, a 3-story Greek revival showpiece. Corinthian columns stabbing into the Louisiana sky. Octave Bogard inherited the estate and the sprawling sugar works that fed it from his father, along with a reputation society, politely called strict. Those he owned had another word for it. At 43, Octave ran his household with the same iron will he used on the plantation. His wife, Celeste, a delicate daughter of a prominent Creole line, had learned to look away. Their children, Etienne, 19, Margot, 17, Felipe, 15, and little Amélie, 8, were raised to see the people who served them as inventory, no different from the crystal or the candle holders on the dining table. The mansion held more than the immediate family. Octave's younger brother, Auguste, and his wife, Lucille, lived there with their 14-year-old twins, Henry and Louis. Auguste handled city business for the plantation. Lucille curated salons for New Orleans' cultured set. Octave's mother, Grandmere Bogard, 78, and still a force hovered over major decisions. Celeste's unmarried sister, Tante Felicite, sharp-tongued and sharped, missed nothing that moved behind those doors. Around them lived 26 enslaved souls, each carrying the weight of their bondage. None bore a heavier load than Violet, born in the Bogard quarters in 1823. Violet was the daughter of Essie, the former head cook, who worked herself to death when Violet was 14. From that day, Violet stepped into her mother's space and became responsible for feeding the very family that owned her. She had a gift in the kitchen that defied explanation, a palm that measured spices without a scale, an eye that knew exactly when a roux turned from brown to perfect mahogany, a nose that could judge a roast without a bite. New Orleans society praised Bogard dinners without knowing the hands that made them. The price of that praise was brutal. Violet rose before the sun to start breakfast, and often collapsed after midnight when the last pan was scrubbed. Her windowless room held a straw mattress, a spare dress, and a small wooden cross that had belonged to her mother, and there was a cruelty particular to her station. As head cook, she was forbidden to taste the food she created. She judged by color, texture, and scent, never a mouthful. Octave took pleasure in the rule. She would prepare food fit for rulers and eat scraps forever. Other enslaved workers regarded Violet with both respect and sorrow. Her skill brought small protections, rarely whipped, never sent to the cane butt. It also sealed her isolation. Friendship and moments of joy, the few comforts of the quarters, were precious and scarce for someone chained to the stove. Still, sparks of life insisted on themselves. Samuel, son of the stable master, had caught Violet's eye. He was 28, careful, broad-shouldered, with a mind that didn't bend easily. Stolen glances became whispered conversations in the quiet after midnight, and those whispers deepened into something more dangerous. Samuel dreamed of buying freedom, carving out a life somewhere the law might leave them alone, but on a plantation where a strong field hand could throw $50 a year into a master's ledger. Dreams like that floated far as stars. There was old Moses Tooth, a butler 40 years, bent to the Bogard bell. His back curved, his hair gone iron gray. Moses could summon wine before it was requested, and vanish before a private word needed eaves. Society called him loyal. Those who searched his eyes sometimes saw a banked fire. Lily, just 16, served. Celeste and her daughters. Pretty in a way that drew dangerous attention, she moved like a shadow, efficient, invisible, always listening for the footfall that meant trouble. Out by the stables worked Thomas, Samuel's father, a quiet master of horses who'd seen 3 owners, buried 2 wives, and learned to let his face show nothing, he truly thought. The house moved on rails, laid decades earlier. Breakfast at 7 in the garden room. Luncheon at 1, with merchants, planters, and hangers-on, drifting in and out to trade favors and gossip. But Sunday supper, the 6 o'clock ritual beneath the Parisian chandelier, was the week's crown. 20 places set with fine china, sterling, and crystal that scattered candlelight like cut stars. Business talk softly, or not at all. Family presented itself to itself. For Violet, Sunday supper was the summit and the test. Every stock simmered just so, every glaze reduced to the edge of caramel, every crust lacquered, every course timed, to land like a drumbeat, a flawless parade on porcelain, orchestrated by a woman who wasn't permitted a taste. The Bogards believed Sunday bound them together, made them untouchable. They didn't know that Sunday would be the thing that timed their last breaths. And they couldn't imagine that the only person who'd see dawn was the woman in the kitchen, whose hands had built their table and whose memory held everything they'd ever done. She always began her Sunday work 2 days early. By Friday morning, Violet was at the French market, selecting only the finest ingredients, mapping out a 7-course menu that would honor Creole tradition and remind the Bogards of the cook's unmatched skill. The sequence rarely changed. Delicate soup, fish bathed in sauces that shimmered in candlelight, fowl perfumed with distant spices, vegetables cut and dressed in the garden's freshest offerings, rich meat courses that spoke of wealth, and, at the end, desserts crafted like sculpture. The ritual was as fixed as the clock. At 5:30 sharp, the family gathered in the parlor, men swirling brandy, women sipping cordials as light as perfume. Conversations skipped between business and gossip, while the children listened, absorbing the rules of their place. At 6 exactly, old Moses would appear at the doorway, voice smooth as polished silver. Supper is served, and they would file into the dining room like parishioners walking to the altar. Octave at the head, Celeste opposite, the rest in their permanent places. Grandmere at his right, August at his left. Each person knew their part in this performance of harmony. But in the spring of 1847, the harmony had begun to sour. The sugar harvest had drowned in floods the year before. Creditors were circling. Octave had already sold off land and was beginning to weigh a choice he'd once called unthinkable, selling some of his slaves. The pressure sharpened his temper into something quick and unpredictable. Those in his house learned to read the weather in his jaw when he bent over the ledgers, in the flat steel of his voice when he issued orders. And worst of all, in the icy stillness in his eyes when he was inventing new punishments. It was in those weeks when tempers and fear both ran high that Violet and Samuel's quiet bond grew into something harder to hide. And then came the moment that shattered any chance of keeping it secret. It was a suffocating Thursday afternoon in late June. The air pressed heavy on New Orleans, thick with the smell of hot stone and river mud. Violet was in the kitchen, arranging delicate canapes for a dinner party honoring visitors from Charleston, when she heard Samuel's voice raised, strained, cutting across the courtyard. She crossed to the window. Samuel was on his knees in the dust, shirt ripped and blood streaking his back. Octave stood over him, whip in hand, his face twisted with fury. "You dare look at my daughter with those eyes?" The accusation cracked through the air. "You forget your place, boy." Violet felt her stomach drop. Margot, 17, flirtatious, had been lingering in the stables for weeks. Violet had seen the way the girl's cheeks warmed near Samuel, and she'd seen Samuel do what a man in his position must: avoid her eyes, avoid being alone with her. But here, on Bogard ground, a slave's reluctance could be twisted into insolence, and insolence was often a death sentence. "Please, Master Bogard," Samuel gasped between the blows. I would. Never," the whip answered for him, hissing through the air. Violet was moving before she could think. She pushed through the kitchen door, stepped between the leather and Samuel's torn skin. "Please, Master Octave," she said, breath catching. "Samuel done nothing wrong. He's a good man. He works." She stopped. His gaze had turned, on her edge, cooling into something sharper, colder. Around them, the other enslaved workers melted back into shadow, as if distance could spare them what was coming. "So," Octave said quietly, "the cook thinks she can tell me how to discipline my property?" Her knees shook, but she stayed where she was, shielding Samuel. "No, master. You just what?" He stepped close enough for her to smell the brandy on his breath, to see the web of broken vessels in his eyes. "You just think, because you can cook a decent meal, you get to question my judgment." The courtyard went silent but for Samuel's ragged breathing and the call of a mockingbird somewhere beyond the garden wall. Violet knew she had crossed a threshold she could never step back over. "Samuel is a good man," she said again, voice steady now. "He ain't done nothing to deserve this." Octave's laugh was brittle as shattered glass. "A good man. He's property, girl, my property. And so are you." He leaned in, voice low. "And I think you've forgotten that." Samuel was dragged to the tack room and locked inside without food or water. "He stays there," Octave announced, "until he remembers respect." For Violet, he saved something more calculated. From now on, she would still prepare every meal, but she would not eat until every family member declared themselves satisfied. And, as he added with a slow smile, "I am very difficult to satisfy." The next 3 days blurred into hunger and humiliation. Violet worked the stove on nothing but water and whatever scraps old Moses or young Lily could smuggle to her unseen. Her hands trembled, kneading dough. Her vision swam over simmering sauces. Her legs nearly buckled carrying silver trays to the table. And still, Octave found fault: too much salt, not enough tenderness, vegetables ruined. Each complaint bought her another day without food. He would describe the flavors of her work in rich detail, savoring every bite while she stood silent in the corner, empty-stomached, watching. On the second day, Samuel forced the tackroom door and staggered toward the kitchen, desperate. He didn't make it. Octave's men caught him, and the beating they gave him was bad enough to summon Dr. Thibodeau. While the doctor tended Samuel's wounds, he noticed Violet nearby, gaunt, hollow-eyed, but with something burning in her gaze. Later, he told his wife, "That girl's past the breaking point. I've seen it before. It's dangerous." Thibodeau knew the fragile machinery that kept plantation society upright, and he knew what happened when the pressure inside that machine turned too high. He had seen enough cruelty to know its different endings. Most people, when pushed past their breaking point, simply collapsed into shadows of themselves, hollow, compliant, going through the motions of survival without truly living. But there were others, a rare and dangerous few, who turned that suffering into something sharper. They would smile as they stored away the pain, wait without impatience, and strike with precision when the moment came. Dr. Thibodeau knew that look, and when he saw it in Violet's eyes, steady, purposeful, while her hands tended Samuel's wounds with perfect control, despite days of hunger, he recognized the signs. He made a quiet mental note to warn Octave, but like too many good intentions, it was something he kept meaning to do, until there was no time left. On the third day of her punishment, something in Violet's spirit shifted. Standing in the dining room, swaying on her feet from hunger, she watched Octave savor a slice of her praline bread pudding, describing each flavor in almost theatrical detail, and a cold clarity settled over her, like a slow fog rolling in from the Mississippi. She began noticing things she'd never bothered to see before. The faint tremor in Octave's hand whenever finances weighed on him harder than he admitted. The way Celeste's eyes lingered too long on the brandy decanter, when she thought no one was watching. The hungry, unsettling way young Felipe glanced toward Lily when his parents' attention drifted. Most important of all, she tracked their patterns like a map. Grandmere always took her medicine exactly 30 minutes before eating. August checked his pocket watch at the table every 15 minutes, without fail. Little Amelie ate her vegetables first, saving her favorite bites for the end. These were no longer just quirks of the household she served. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Violet had decided she would solve it. That night, lying on her straw mattress after Octave had grudgingly declared himself satisfied with her supper, she made her choice. She would keep cooking with the same skill they expected, only now, she would serve them something they could never forget. It wouldn't be an act of rage. It would be prepared like her finest meals, crafted with patience, precision, and the kind of seasoning only years of quiet observation could provide. She would wait for the moment, and when it came, the Bogard family would dine on her justice, as July's heat rose heavy over New Orleans. Violet's outward face returned to the calm, capable servant the family believed they had broken. She moved through her duties with quiet efficiency, no hint of the machinery working behind her eyes. If anything, the Bogards believed the punishment had worked. Her meals were more exceptional than ever, plated with artistry, flavors elevated to a level they hadn't tasted before. But those who knew Violet saw the change. Old Moses noticed the way she moved, no longer with the fluid grace of someone who loved her craft, but with the precise rhythm of a clock. Samuel, still recovering in the quarters, felt it most of all. She still touched his wounds gently, but her eyes held the cold, fixed stare of a snake just before it struck. "Violet," he whispered one morning before she left for the kitchen, "you're scaring me. What's going on in your head?" She paused in the doorway, framed in pale morning light. "I'm going to take care of everything," she said quietly. "What do you mean, take care of everything?" But she was already gone, leaving him, with the certainty that whatever she was planning, it would change everything. The family remained blind to it all. If they noticed anything, it was only that Violet's cooking had reached new heights. They didn't see that her market trips had taken on a second purpose. In the shaded corners of the French market, away from the respectable stalls, Violet began seeking out the herb women, the root sellers, the quiet practitioners whose knowledge moved in whispers. She asked questions that, to the casual ear, sounded harmless, but the meaning in those questions was darker. In New Orleans, the line between medicine and poison had always been thin. African traditions, Caribbean voodoo, and native plant lore, intertwined in a hidden network of healers who knew the double edge of every root and leaf. What cured in the right measure could kill in another. What eased pain could mimic disease, and in the right hands, it could do both at once. Violet never asked for anything directly. She drifted through conversations, collecting fragments of knowledge, which herbs could mimic food sickness, which mushrooms could bring fever and confusion, which combinations could confound even an experienced doctor. Her greatest source became an unlikely friend, Mama Brigitte, an elderly Creole woman tucked into the farthest corner of the market. They said she'd been born free in Haiti before the revolution, that she was older than she looked, and that her knowledge of plants was deeper than any apothecary's. Mama Brigitte never asked why the Bogard's cook wanted to know the things she did. Perhaps she saw the hunger for power behind Violet's careful words. Perhaps she simply understood that knowledge, once earned, belongs to the one who needs it most. And one day, holding up a twisted length of dried root, she began to teach Violet what it could do. It's good for stomach troubles in small amounts, Mama Brigitte told her, turning the rough, twisted root over in her hands. But too much, and it turns on you. Makes a person very sick, very fast. Violet listened like a pupil to a master, soaking up every word and filing it away for the day she would need it. From Brigitte, she learned more than just plant names. She learned which roots could squeeze the breath from a body, which herbs could jolt or still a heartbeat, which mushrooms could cloud the brain and mimic a sudden fever or stroke. Most valuable of all, Mama Brigitte taught her the hidden arithmetic of poison, timing, dosage, and the way different bodies would carry it through their veins. She explained how quickly certain toxins took hold, which ones lingered, and how to adjust for the weight, age, and strength of a victim. It changed everything for Violet. Cooking was no longer just a way to fill bellies. It became a way to command them. By midsummer, Violet began experimenting in whispers, a touch of one powdered root to a sauce, just enough to make August complain of indigestion. A dusting of another into vegetables that left young Felipe pale and unsettled. For the evening, she was learning their tolerances, their weaknesses, the small reactions no one else noticed. The family chalked up these minor discomforts to the sweltering Louisiana heat. When Celeste mentioned stomach upset, Dr. Thibodeau prescribed a mild tonic and told her to avoid overly rich foods until the weather cooled. When little Amelie grew listless for a day, everyone agreed the summer sun had worn her out. While Violet's knowledge grew sharper, her world grew smaller. She had always stood a little apart from the rest of the staff because of her position in the kitchen, but now the distance widened. Lily, who once found comfort in Violet's counsel, was met with polite but hollow replies. Old Moses, who had been like a father since her mother's death, found their talks reduced to quick exchanges about chores. Even Thomas, Samuel's father, sensed something had shifted, the stillness of a dangerous animal just before it strikes. Only Samuel seemed to glimpse the truth beneath her mask, though she kept him at a distance. One warm night in August, sitting together in the small garden behind the quarters, he whispered, "You're changing, Violet. I don't know who I'm looking at anymore." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gazed upward at the faint stars struggling against the heavy summer air. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of steel. "They took everything from me. My mother, my childhood, my freedom, and when I finally found something worth keeping, when I found you, they tried to take that too. They beat you, starved me, and laughed while they did it." Samuel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "That don't mean you got to become like them," he said softly. "I'm not becoming like them," Violet replied, her tone so cold it made his chest tighten. "They destroy because it pleases them. I'll destroy because it's necessary." His voice dropped to a warning. "What are you planning?" She met his eyes with a look he'd never seen before, a calmness so absolute it was more frightening than rage. "I'm going to serve them exactly what they deserve," she said. "No more, no less." From that night, Her preparations entered their final phase. She had her substances. She knew the measures. She could predict each member of the household as if she'd written their habits into a ledger. All she needed was the right night. And then she would serve her reckoning. That night came with Octave's announcement in late September. The sugar harvest had been strong enough to pull him from the shadow of debt and restore his pride. He would host a Sunday supper to mark his triumph, a celebration for family and some of the most influential men in Louisiana. It was to be the grandest gathering the mansion had ever seen. Judge Honor Dufresne and his wife, banker Edouard Blanchot, the merchant Alex Boudreau, Reverend Father Antoine Marigny, to bless the table. Dr. Armand Thibodeau, both friend and physician. Even Mayor Auguste Chateau. In all, 23 guests would join the 13 Bogards at the table. For Violet, it was the stage she'd been waiting for, the night when every face tied to her humiliation, and every hand that had wielded cruelty would be under her roof, eating her food. Octave, wanting to impress his guests with flawless service, ordered that every house servant remain in the mansion the entire night, ready for any request. That decree meant the people who had seen her at her lowest would also see her final act in the days before the supper. She worked with an intensity that left even the most seasoned servants awed. At the French market, she inspected every tomato for perfect ripeness, rejected cuts of meat with less than ideal marveling, and tested each herb for maximum potency. The menu she planned was a masterwork of Creole cuisine and of her other, darker craft. It would open with turtle soup, seasoned to stir the appetite and mask the first notes of what was to come. Next, pompano bathed in a sauce so intricate it demanded hours of her attention. Then, squab stuffed with a family recipe passed down from her mother, but changed in ways no ancestor of hers could have imagined. The meat courses would arrive, with ceremony, beef and pork, each prepared in distinct styles, each carrying subtle signatures only she would know. The vegetables from the mansion's gardens, the bread risen to flawless texture, all of it would be perfect. Perfect in presentation, perfect in taste, and perfect in purpose. But it was the dessert course that would crown the evening. Violet's true masterpiece. Her famed praline bread pudding with a custard sauce so rich, so flawless, it had become the finale demanded at every important Bogard dinner for years. The recipe had been her mother's, a legacy of enslaved cooks, stretching back generations, perfected in plantation kitchens across Louisiana. Violet had refined it to an art form, every texture, every flavor balanced like a symphony. Yet, this time, the masterpiece would carry a secret her mother had never imagined, a recipe months in the making, one that would turn celebration into something unforgettable and final. Her final preparations began on Friday morning at Mama Brigitte's stall in the French market. The old woman greeted her with that same knowing smile, but her eyes, ancient, deep, and shadowed, held a weight they hadn't before. "You sure about this road you're walking, child?" she asked, wrapping the last of the herbs in brown paper. "Once you start down it, there's no turning back." Violet met her gaze without a flicker. "I'm already too far to turn back." They made sure of that. Mama Brigitte nodded slowly, placing the bundle in her hands. "Then may God have mercy on all your souls, because you won't find it anywhere else." That weekend, as the kitchen filled with the rhythm of preparations, Violet moved with an eerie precision, every motion deliberate, every step part of a larger design. Gone was the hum she usually carried while cooking. In its place was a silence that clung to the air like smoke. Samuel, still walking gingerly from his beating, but able to move around the grounds, found excuses to pass through the kitchen again and again. Each time, the sight chilled him. Violet's hands worked with the cold steadiness of a surgeon. Her face was unreadable, her focus absolute. By Saturday night, he couldn't stand it any longer. He waited until the kitchen was empty, then approached as she methodically cleaned her knives. "Violet, please," he whispered. Whatever you're planning, don't. We can find another way. She didn't look up, but her hands stilled. Another way to what, Samuel? Freedom. Justice. To not destroy yourself, he said. Her eyes finally met his, and he stepped back at what he saw there. You think there's justice for people like us. You think if we just wait, work, pray hard enough, someone will set things right. If you go through with this, you'll go down with them. I've already been destroyed, she said, setting the knife aside. The only choice left is whether I die alone, or take them with me. And us. What about us? For the first time in weeks, a flicker of the woman he loved crossed her face. But it was gone in a heartbeat. If you love me, she murmured, you'll find a way to not be here tomorrow night. Samuel stared at her, realization sinking like ice in his veins. Dear God, what have you done? She turned away, her silence answering him more than words. He knew then that whatever could have stopped her had died weeks ago, in a courtyard, under a merciless sun. When the whip fell across his back and the light in her eyes changed forever. Sunday, October 3rd, 1847, the day dawned crisp and cool, autumn whispering through the garden district at last. Inside the Bogard mansion, the servants were already in motion before first light. This would be the social event of the season, and every polished surface, every flicker of candlelight, every morsel of food would be perfect. Violet rose as she had for a decade, but today her routine felt like a ritual. In the cracked shard of mirror by her straw mattress, a face she barely recognized stared back, hollow-cheeked from weeks of hunger, eyes calm in a way that was almost unnatural. She studied herself for a moment, then turned away. In the kitchen, she conducted the day like a composer leading an orchestra. Pots hissed, knives chopped in rhythm, fires roared. But the most critical parts of the meal, the sauces, the seasonings, she guarded jealously. No one touched them but her. Old Moses, moving between dining room and kitchen, began to notice something unsettling. Violet seemed to know where everyone in the house was, at any given moment. If footsteps neared, she would pause, mid-task, head tilting to listen. More than once, he caught her subtly tracking voices, drifting from other rooms. She's got ears like a cat today, he muttered to Lily as they polished the silver. She's been strange for weeks, Lily replied without looking up. Ever since Master Octave punished her and Samuel, neither of them knew her awareness wasn't nervousness. It was timing. Every step of her plan depended on precision down to the moment. By mid-morning, the mansion smelled of roasting, meats, and fresh bread. Flowers arrived, arranged in bursts of color in every room. Crystal gleamed like ice under the chandeliers. The table was a study in perfection. Irish linen, Limoges, china, sterling silver, catching the light like a scattering of stars. Upstairs, the family prepared. Celeste sat for hours, while Lily twisted her hair into a tower of pins and pomade. Grandme, Bogard swathed in black silk and emeralds, prepared to hold court from her seat of honor. In Octave's study, the men sipped brandy and boasted about harvest yields and political maneuverings. August, flushed with success, told and retold his triumphs in business. The children were dressed to be admired, Felipe and the twins in new suits, little Amélie in a white organdy dress. They'd been warned. They were to be charming, silent. Ornaments at the table. By late afternoon, the first guests arrived, their carriages rolling up the drive as the sun began to slip low, throwing the mansion's white columns into gold. Inside, everything was ready, and in the kitchen, so was Violet. Judge Dufresne and his wife, Matilda, arrived first, followed soon after by banker Blanchard and his daughter, Celestine, a young woman whose beauty and dowry had made her one of the most sought-after prospects in New Orleans. Dr. Thibodeau came next, his ever-present medical bag in hand, silently hoping it would remain closed on what was supposed to be a night of pure celebration. The arrival of Mayor Shuto sent a ripple through the room. His presence brought weight to the evening, political weight. A stout man with formidable whiskers, and a fondness for grand, winding speeches. He wasted no time congratulating Octave on his harvest, declaring the future of Louisiana's sugar trade brighter than ever, and while polite greetings filled the air, Violet was already in motion. The noise and movement of arriving guests, the disruption of routine, gave her the cover she needed to perform. The most critical step in her plan. Like an apothecary at her bench, she measured each addition with a precision that bordered on surgical. Different components of the feast received different treatments, each guest's portion tailored to their habits, constitution, and seat at the table. The quantities were exact, enough to act, but subtle enough that no single plate, if tested, would reveal the truth. This was the real brilliance of her work, not just the dosing, but the timing. These substances would move slowly, building, combining, strengthening one another over the course of the meal, until they reached their peak, together. By the time anyone sensed danger, the moment for rescue would be long past. At exactly 6 o'clock, the house came to attention. In the parlor, Octave presided like a monarch among his court. Guests sipping brandy and cordials, laughter swelling under the glow of chandeliers. From her post in the kitchen doorway, Violet watched them. Every face that had harmed her, ignored her, or upheld the system that had stolen her life, gathered here in their finery. About to eat the meal she had crafted for them, old Moses stepped into the parlor, bowing low. "Ladies and gentlemen, supper is served." The procession to the dining room followed the same rigid protocol it always had. Octave lead with Mayor Shuto at his side. Celeste followed with Judge Dufresne. Grandmere Beauregard took her place of honor, supported by young Etienne. The rest found their seats according to rank and ritual. The room glowed with opulence. Dozens of candles painted the air in warm light. Crystal glasses caught and fractured the glow into 1,000 sparks. The sense of Violet's cooking wrapped around the gathering like a promise. She did not join them. As always, she worked in the background, but unlike past feasts, there was no pride in her eyes tonight. Only the cool detachment of a scientist, observing her experiment unfold. The first course, delicate turtle soup, met with immediate praise. Judge Dufresne declared it a triumph. Blanchard called it superior to Paris best. Even Grandmere Beauregard, whose approval was a rare thing, nodded after her first spoonful. None knew the soup carried the opening notes of Violet's darker composition. The second course, pompano, in a sauce that had taken hours to perfect, was met with gasps of delight. Mayor Shuto proclaimed it fit for the gods, and insisted Octave secure the recipe. Wine loosened tongues. The dining room swelled with laughter, toasts, and the easy warmth of celebration. But from her place in the shadows, Violet began to see the smallest cracks forming. August's appetite, usually endless, slowed just a fraction. Celeste's hand lingered over her stomach. Young Felipe's cheeks glowed unnaturally warm. The meat courses drew audible admiration. The beef was a testament to her technical mastery. The pork, a showcase of unexpected flavor. Yet Dr. Thibodeau, trained to notice what others missed, saw fleeting signs that unsettled him. Grandmere Beauregard as subtle difficulty swallowing. Young Henry's sudden sheen of sweat. Blanchard's growing effort to keep pace in conversation. It was nothing overt, nothing alarming. Yet then came dessert. Violet's praline bread pudding, her mother's legacy, perfected over years, emerged from the kitchen in flawless form. The custard was silken, the pralines caramelized to the exact heartbeat before burning. The final course of the night, and the final step in her plan. Hidden inside this flawless piece of Creole perfection was the final stroke of Violet's deadly composition. As the dessert was served, accompanied by coffee and cordials, the compliments flowed like fine wine. Mayor Shuto declared he'd have to reconsider what the finest dessert in Louisiana truly meant. Judge Dufresne suggested Violet's gifts were wasted in a private household, that she ought to be serving kings. octaves soaked in their praise, raising his glass in a self-satisfied toast. To the finest cook in all Louisiana, he proclaimed, whose talents have made this evening a triumph to be remembered for years to come. If only he had known how chillingly prophetic those words would be. The meal wound down. Guests reclined in their chairs with the heavy contentment of a feast well enjoyed. And then it began. August, mid-anecdote, faltered. His hand shot to his throat, his face twisting in confusion and pain. "I feel," he began, but the words snagged in his throat like barbs. Celeste's silk fan slipped from her trembling hands. The color drained from her cheeks until her skin was the color of parchment. "Something's wrong," Dr. Thibodeau said sharply, already on his feet. But even as he spoke, a sharp, unnatural lurch gripped his stomach. The transformation was rapid, horrifying. Within minutes, elegance and laughter gave way to chaos. One after another, the diners doubled over. Abdominal pain, nausea, shallow gasps for air, a burning heat racing through their veins. Grandmere Beauregard's frail body gave out first. She crumpled, shattering her water glass, jagged crystals scattering like icy snow. Little Amelie's white dress clung damp with sweat, and worse, her thin voice, calling for her mother, faded into silence, the poison tearing through her small body faster than any adult. Mayor Chouteau, all dignity gone, crawled toward the door, vomiting as his body fought hopelessly to rid itself of what was killing him. Dr. Thibodeau tried to act, to do something, even as his own vision blurred. But there is no training for this. For a poison crafted to attack every system at once, designed to outpace every natural defense. "Get help," he gasped to old Moses, who stood rooted in the doorway, unable to move. But the plea collapsed into silence, Thibodeau doubling over with the grim clarity that no help would come in time. In the kitchen, Violet stood motionless, her face calm, tears sliding down her cheeks, not regret, but release. Samuel found her there. He had tried to obey her and stay away, but his love kept him near. Now, hearing the screams, seeing her tears, he understood. "Violet," his voice shook. "What have you done?" She turned to him. For the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of the woman he had known, but only a shadow. "I served them exactly what they deserved," she said quietly. "Nothing more, nothing less." By midnight, the Bogard mansion was silent. Only the murmur of the surviving slaves' prayers, and the faint scratch of Dr. Thibodeau's pen remained as he filled in the death certificates required by law. His own survival would remain a mystery. Maybe smaller portions, maybe an odd resilience from years of medicine. He would never know. The official record would read, "Sudden fever of unknown origin." It was a fiction, but a necessary one. A mass poisoning at one of New Orleans' most elite gatherings would ignite panic and ruin reputations. And with Violet's choice of all natural, untraceable substances, proving murder was impossible. The consequences rippled for years. With the entire family dead, the plantation was seized by creditors. The mansion stood empty nearly a decade before. A northern buyer claimed it, unaware of its history. The enslaved were scattered, families shattered in estate sales. Moses and Thomas went to owners who valued their skill. Lily vanished into the slave market's darker networks. Samuel lived just 2 more years, dying in Mississippi in what some whispered was no accident. And Violet? She vanished. Some say she was sold to a remote parish and died there. Others believe she slipped away that night and reached the north, maybe even Canada. But in the French Quarter, the story is told differently. They say she never ran, never hid. She simply walked away from the Bogard mansion, disappearing into the gaslit streets of New Orleans, swallowed whole by the shadows. According to one version of events, Violet did not flee into obscurity. They say she survived by cooking for the poorest souls in New Orleans, under a false name, finding a strange redemption in feeding those who truly needed her. Dr. Thibodeau, carried the secret for the rest of his life. His private journal, found more than a century later, revealed not just what he had seen, but the grudging respect he felt for the precision and mastery of her plan. She was not a killer by nature, he wrote months after the tragedy. She was made into one by a system that would have broken most long before she reached her breaking point. If guilt must be assigned, it belongs to all of us who tolerated the world that created her desperation. When the Bogard mansion was reoccupied in the late 1850s, strange things began. Dinner guests falling suddenly ill, servants smelling cooking in an empty kitchen, cooks quitting after claiming to see a young black woman standing at the stove. Before dawn, rumors and ghost tales merged with whispers of what really happened that October night, giving the mansion a reputation as one of New Orleans' most haunted houses. It changed owners again and again. During the Civil War, it housed Union soldiers and later served as a hospital. Military logs mentioned patients struck by sudden, unexplained illness, as though whatever had poisoned the Bogards still lingered in the walls. In the 1880s, a historical society bought the property to preserve it, but accidents and setbacks drove them out. Finally, in 1894, the mansion was torn down. Workers said the kitchen looked untouched, preserved. Today, a small park sits on the spot, and locals still report strange happenings, sudden sickness during gatherings, the scent of food when no one's cooking, and sometimes the sight of a young black woman in an antebellum dress, walking alone through the morning fog. But Violet's true legacy isn't just ghost stories. It's the warning her life carved into history about the human capacity for cruelty and for resistance. Slavery was built on the arrogant belief that people could be reduced to property, their suffering ignored without consequence. But every system of oppression plants the seeds of its own destruction, in the very cruelty it depends on to survive. The Bogards weren't cartoon villains. They were children of their time, raised to see slavery as normal, but their willingness to profit from a system of human misery sealed their fate. And Violet's vengeance, it was understandable, it was inevitable, and it was tragic. The woman who once found joy in feeding others was turned into someone who found purpose in destroying them, not because she was born evil, but because the world left her no other path to dignity or justice. The most terrifying horror in this story isn't supernatural, it's human. The ghost that truly haunted the Bogard mansion was not Violet, but the guilt of an entire society. So what do you think? Was every detail of this plan real, or has history polished it into something too perfect to be true? Did Violet bring justice, or go too far? Leave your thoughts below, and if you want more dark history and hidden horrors, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this story with someone who loves mysteries.